Hey, I'm going to show you how to make kombucha. Let's jump right into it by breaking down the process into 3 phases. Kombucha is a fermented tea, so naturally, the first phase is called first fermentation, or F1 for short. This is where we mix our sweet tea and our starter culture together and let it sit in a vessel for several days to a few weeks. The second phase is called second fermentation, or F2 for short, where we flavor and bottle our kombucha after it's completed its first fermentation. Once bottled, we'll let it sit for another few days until it gets nice and carbonated. How long your F2 lasts will vary depending on what kind of flavorings you use and other factors such as the weather and climate. The third phase is the chilling stage. Once you're sure that your kombucha is carbonated, you want to completely chill them before you open them. The cold settles the carbonation down a bit so you won't end up with a complete mess on your hands. Feel free to chill one bottle at a time until you like the results. If it's not carbonated enough, you can totally bring it back out of the fridge and leave it for more time. It absolutely won't hurt it. You may need to chill a few bottles, taste them, and wait a few more days until you've got it just right. This is where a lot of trial and error comes into play, so don't be afraid to experiment. Alright, let's start off by listing the things that we'll need. First and foremost, and most importantly, you'll need a SCOBY, or starter liquid. SCOBY is an acronym that stands for Symbiotic Culture of Bacteria and Yeast. This is kombucha that has already undergone its first fermentation and is strong enough to kickstart a fresh new batch of kombucha. Next, you'll need a glass vessel that holds 1 liquid gallon, a breathable cover, such as this cotton cloth. Some people use cheesecloths or clean strips of old t-shirts, but the only thing I don't recommend are paper towels, as these can leave little dusties in your brew. And you'll need rubber bands to keep it in place, several pressure-rated glass bottles. I'm reusing GT's kombucha bottles, but you can use flip-top bottles or whatever can handle the pressure of second fermentation. Pure tea, loose leaf or bagged, and no added flavors. Black and green teas are a great choice for kombucha. Feel free to experiment with different tea combinations, but at least for the first batch, let's just keep it simple with black and green. Sugar. It doesn't have to be raw or organic, but it really should be cane sugar, since it's easier for your culture to eat and digest. Very little to no sugar will be left at the end of the fermentation process anyway, since it's mainly for your SCOBY. Soft water. And by this, I mean bottled, distilled, purified spring water, as long as it's not tap. And lastly, it would be helpful to have a stainless steel straw, a strainer, and a gallon pitcher. They're not totally necessary, but they are nice to have. First things first, let's make some tea. As you can see, I already have mine made. I just make my tea in a pot on the stove, but feel free to make it however you usually make tea. Rather that's in a French press or a kettle or whatever. The measurements are important, but the method is not. For a gallon batch of kombucha, bring 2 cups or 500 grams of water to a boil. Take it off the heat and let it cool down for a minute or 2. Add in 8 tea bags, or 2 tablespoons of loose leaf tea instead, if that's what you're using. I'm using a mixture of green and black tea bags, so 4 bags each for me. Let it steep, covered, for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, remove the bags and let the tea concentrate cool. I usually let everything cool while I'm bottling, so I cover it with a lid, just so that no dust gets in my tea. After the bags have cooled, with clean hands, feel free to squeeze them to get out every last drop of tea. Now, let's make some booch. Unfortunately, the original video of me actually making a whole gallon of kombucha somehow got deleted, but the process is so simple I'm gonna explain it anyway. Thankfully, I did have footage of me making a baby batch of kombucha. The process is the exact same, so let's just imagine that this is instead a gallon vessel, and we are in fact making a gallon of kombucha. First, you'll pour about 1 cup, or 250 grams, of sugar into your vessel. Next, a little less than 2 cups, or about 430 grams of your tea concentrate. Now give that a little stir to dissolve the sugar, and we'll go ahead and add in about 10 cups of water, or 2,500 grams, or about 5 of these bottles here. Give it another good stir. Lastly, we'll add in at least 2 cups of strong starter tea, so about 480 to 500 grams. Give it a good gentle stir, and I mean better than the one I was able to give this baby here. And that is literally it. Cover with your cloth, secure with a rubber band, and let your brew sit to ferment. You'll want to let your brew sit for about 7 to 14 days, but I'll go a little more into detail about that later. Kombucha is an aerobic brew, so it needs somewhere with good airflow to ferment. Just remember to keep it out of direct sunlight. For the first week, literally just leave your brew alone and be patient. Avoid the urge to lift the cover. Among other concerns, the more you mess with it, the more of a chance of nasties getting into your brew, possibly causing a concern for mold. You can begin tasting around day 7 if you like. You'll know when it's done when it's tart and tangy and just a little sweet. If it's too sweet, just leave it for a few more days until it's not. Here in Georgia, however, in my house that is consistently 76 degrees Fahrenheit, I like to let my brew sit for about 14 days. Within the first few days, you should start to notice a few bubbles around the rim, which just means that a new pellicle is forming. A pellicle is a byproduct of fermentation, so that means that your brew is working. After a few more days, those bubbles will transform into a thin, jelly-like sheet. By the end, it will look like a thick cellulose mat. It's honestly pretty gnarly, but all totally normal. White bits can be alarming, but most of the time it's just yeast and not mold. Dark spots are also just clumps of yeast. Again, totally normal. Little specks of black are usually just leftover bits of tea, nothing to be concerned about. Mold is probably your #1 concern, but it's way less common than you think. Remember this, mold is always dry, mold is always fuzzy. Mold will always be on the top of your brew, never underneath the pellicle. Sometimes it can be green or white or brown, but it will always be dry and fuzzy. If you do notice some funky stuff happening, just as long as it's not dry or fuzzy, it's probably just weird kombucha stuff, which ironically is normal. If in the unlikely event that your kombucha does mold, never try to salvage it, any part of it. Just toss it out, sanitize your vessel, and start fresh. So this batch has been fermenting for 14 days, and now our kombucha is ready to go on to the next phase, second fermentation. This is what I like to call bottle and brew day, since now we're flavoring and bottling our fermented booch and brewing a brand new batch. These are the steps of how my bottle and brew days usually go. First thing I do is wash my hands and rinse them well. With those clean hands, I reach in and pick up the pellicle that has formed on top. Because the pellicle is simply a byproduct of fermentation, it's not actually needed to kickstart the process. By the way, this dark spot is just a clump of yeast. Totally normal. But anyway, I just throw my pellicles away. You can do other things with them. I've heard of some people being really creative with them, but I personally don't. Let's give it a little taste and a gentle stir. When tasting, make sure not to put your mouth directly on the straw, and don't drink right out of the vessel. We don't want to contaminate our brew with our mouth germs. We'll be able to start the process over again by saving some of this kombucha to use as a starter tea for our next batch. I'm gathering about 2 cups, or 480 grams, of this starter tea and setting it to the side for now. Next, we'll strain the kombucha to get any yeasty floaties out. These are perfectly safe to consume. I'm just trying to get out some of the bigger pieces. Now, we'll go ahead and flavor our brew. Notice that I'm adding 1 tablespoon of extra sugar here. This won't always be necessary. It depends on the fruits and the flavors that you're using. To put it simply, the sugar helps with the carbonation process, and this flavor here just needs a little extra help. Feel free to try this recipe that I call quadrivia, because it only has 4 ingredients: 12 ounces of raspberries, 16 ounces of canned Dole pineapple juice, half a knob of ginger root, and 1 lemon. This is my tried and true recipe, and it has always worked for me. So I made this juice mixture the day before, and I just let it sit in my fridge overnight. but feel free to make juices anytime before your brew day and just store them in your freezer. We'll just give this a good stir, and now we're ready to bottle. Be sure to give it a little taste first. It should be only slightly sweeter than what you're aiming for. It will get more tart during second fermentation. When filling up the bottles, it's important to fill them up pretty high. This helps with the carbonation process. You can see here that even this is too much headspace. Later, I'm going to be filling them up to the neck, so about here, leaving only enough space just so that I can see the new pellicle forming in the bottle. If you do wind up with extra kombucha that doesn't fill a bottle all the way up, don't try putting it through an F2. Not only will it not carbonate properly, but a bottle with too much headspace can cause it to shatter. Instead, try putting it in a smaller pressure-rated bottle, or just drink it fresh. Fresh kombucha has the exact same benefits as carbonated kombucha. You'll want a strong grips when tightening these caps. I recommend using these rubber grippers. This is to make sure that none of the pressure escapes or the carbonation gets lost. You'll want them nice and tight. And now, we let them sit for a while. For my quadrivia, it takes 5 nights exactly. I chill them on the 5th night and can enjoy them by the 6th morning. For other flavors, the timing varies wildly. You can have flavors that may take from 3 days to 30 days, depending on the properties of the fruits or how much sugar you added, so many other variables. For example, my ginger here is on day 14, and I still plan on leaving it for a few more days. This is because ginger root has antimicrobial properties and takes some time to get things revved up. Second fermentation is probably the most tedious part of the kombucha making process. At least it is for me. But don't get discouraged. Just keep experimenting with times, flavors, and sugar amounts until you make something that you like. Like with F1, you'll want to keep these bottles out of direct sunlight. But since we've bottled them and they don't need air anymore, they can be kept in a little closet or cabinet, like I keep mine here. It's right underneath my main brewing station. Within a few days of your second fermentation, you should start to notice a new pellicle growing around the rims of your bottles. This means that it's fermenting properly. If you're using these bottles with these types of caps, a good indicator of carbonation is when the caps start to dome. The doming can actually get pretty high by the end of it. There are some flavors that may take a really long time to get carbonated, like this ginger here. It's been sitting for 14 days, but as you can see, the caps aren't domed at all yet. But it does have a pellicle growing, so I know that fermentation is happening. Every flavor combination is different. It may take a few tries to get a new flavor just right. Once you think it's carbonated enough, take one bottle out and chill it for a couple of hours. Crack it open and give it a tiny taste. If you like it, take the rest of the bottles out and chill them, preferably overnight. If you don't feel like it's ready yet, like maybe it's still too sweet or it's not fizzy enough, it's totally okay to put that same bottle back in your fermenting spot and leave it for another day or two, or more if needed. So at long last, your kombucha is finally completely finished and ready to drink. For this bottle here, it took a total of 20 days. 14 days in F1, 5 days in F2, and chilling overnight has it ready on the 20th day. Sometimes excess carbonation can leave you with a little bit of a mess, so just in case, open your bottles inside a measuring cup or a wide bowl. Well, yep, that's a mess right there. Quadrivia almost always explodes on me like this, yet somehow it still retains its carbonation even if I keep it in the fridge for several days after I've opened it. I should probably throw this out there, I'm still kinda new to making kombucha in general. I've only been doing it for half a year or so the fact that it's making such a mess could just be a troubleshooting error for me, but I personally don't mind since, well, for one, it tastes great. It holds on to its carbonation and it's always consistent. So while we're watching this super cool time lapse, here are a few general tips. A couple of surefire ways to avoid mold is to make sure you're using enough starter tea. Remember at least 2 cups per gallon of booch. And to keep your brew warm. Kombucha likes being between 68 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Speaking of being warm, the time it takes for kombucha to finish its first fermentation really varies. It can depend on climate, weather, and the season. Like I said before, in my 76-degree house in Georgia, I found that my kombucha takes about 14 to 15 days for F1 and a few more days in F2. But the time really can vary. I've heard of some people's brews going from only 5 days all the way up to 30 days. Be sure to keep your brewing area sanitary and clean. We don't want any uninvited microorganisms swimming their way into our brew. I know that this can be a lot to keep up with, so try keeping a kombucha journal. Just a place for you to write down your experience or experiments. This can be really useful to have if something goes wrong and you don't know why. You can always refer back to these notes. And finally, keep doing lots of research and don't be afraid of the trial and error. There's lots of information online, and I promise you that at least some of it's useful. The best way to learn is to experience it for yourself. So that being said, I hope this video was useful to you, and good luck with brewing. Oh, and by the way, yes, this tastes delicious.